A billionaire CEO stops his Rolls-Royce on Michigan Avenue when he sees something impossible. A homeless woman whose hair drags 6 feet behind her through the Chicago slush, nails curled like ancient claws, eating scraps from a dumpster behind his own restaurant. What he does next will change both their lives forever. Welcome to Stories by Jason. If you're settled in and ready for a good story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I've got another exciting story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Thank you so much for the love and support. You're truly appreciated, and I'm so grateful to have you here with me. Marcus Blackwell stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, 73 stories above Chicago's Magnificent Mile, watching the January snow turn the city into a monochrome painting. At 42, he'd built an empire, Blackwell Industries, the tech conglomerate that had revolutionized cloud security and made him one of the 50 wealthiest men in America. $4.3 billion, homes on 3 continents, a Gulfstream G650 on permanent standby, and absolutely no peace. His reflection in the glass looked back at him. Sharp suit, sharper edges, the kind of face that photographed well for Forbes but hadn't smiled genuinely in years. He loosened his tie, preparing for another sleepless night in the office, when movement below caught his eye. 73 floors down in the alley behind Lucerno, the Michelin-starred Italian restaurant his company owned, something was moving that shouldn't have been. Marcus pressed closer to the glass, then reached for the binoculars he kept on his desk. Not for surveillance, for escape, for pretending he was somewhere else. He focused the lenses, and his breath caught. A woman sat hunched beside the dumpster, but calling her simply, a woman felt insufficient for what he was witnessing. Her hair, Jesus Christ, her hair spread around her like a dark ocean, matted and tangled, extending at least 6 feet in every direction. 2 meters, maybe more. It puddled in the slush, collected snow, moved like a living thing when she shifted. Her hands, emerging from torn gloves, showed fingernails that had grown into yellowed spirals, curling back toward her palms like ancient tree roots. She was eating something. Pasta, it looked like. Forkless, she used her twisted fingers to bring the cold noodles to her mouth, her movements careful, practiced, dignified despite everything. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced since his sister Sarah died 15 years ago, since he'd promised her, in that hospital room, that he'd use his power for something more than profit. He'd broken that promise approximately 15 years ago. Mr. Blackwell, his assistant Jennifer's voice crackled through the intercom. You're 8 p.m. with the Singapore investors. Cancel it. Silence, sir. Cancel everything tonight, and call down to security. Tell them there's a woman in the alley behind Lucerno. Tell them I'm coming down, and if they touch her before I get there, they're fired. Mr. Blackwell, I don't understand. But Marcus was already moving, grabbing his overcoat, his mind racing through logistics. Medical team, private room, discretion. The elevator seemed to take hours. His security detail scrambled to follow as he strode through the gleaming lobby, past the shocked faces of employees working late, and out into the brutal Chicago wind. The alley smelled like garbage and desperation. The woman didn't look up when Marcus approached, his $1,000 shoes crunching through ice and refuse. Up close, she was even more devastating, her face barely visible through the curtain of matted hair, her body wrapped in layers of torn clothing, a sleeping bag that looked like it had survived a war. Ma'am, Marcus kept his voice soft, crouching slowly. His security detail hung back, hands on weapons, ready for anything. My name is Marcus. I own the building here. I'd like to help you. She finally looked up, and Marcus felt the ground shift beneath him. Her eyes were green, startling, intelligent, completely aware, not dulled by drugs or alcohol, not empty, just tired, infinitely tired. Help, she said the word like it was a foreign language. You mean the shelter? I've tried. They don't. She gestured vaguely at her hair, her nails. They can't handle this, it's too much. Not a shelter, Marcus said. Something better, medical care, a warm room, food that isn't from a dumpster. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. A chance to feel human again. No strings, no judgment, just help. She studied him with those devastating green eyes. Why? It was the right question, the only question that mattered. Marcus thought of Sarah, of the promise, of the empire he'd built on ruthless competition and calculated risks, of the rivals he'd crushed, the corners he'd cut, the humanity he'd traded for market dominance, of the man he'd become and the man he'd meant to be. "Because I can," he said finally. "Because you're here and I'm here and maybe that means something." The woman was quiet for a long moment. Snow fell between them, collecting on her hair, her shoulders, the space where two worlds touched. "Victoria," she whispered finally. "My name is Victoria Kane." The name sent a shock through Marcus's system, but he kept his face neutral. Kane, it couldn't be, but those eyes. "Victoria," he repeated carefully, "will you let me help you?" She looked at her hands, at the nails that had become claws, at the dirt embedded so deep it had become part of her skin. Then at her hair, the weight she'd carried for so long it had become inseparable from her identity. "I don't know how to be helped anymore," she said, and the honesty in it broke something fundamental in Marcus's chest. "Then we'll figure it out together," he said, extending his hand. Victoria Kane, architect, missing person, presumed dead for 7 years, looked at the billionaire's outstretched hand for 10 seconds that felt like 10 years. Then, moving carefully around her twisted nails, she placed her hand in his. The Blackwell Industries medical team arrived 12 minutes later with a private ambulance. By then, Marcus had his coat wrapped around Victoria's shoulders, and his security detail had cleared the alley. As they helped her into the vehicle, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. Carved into the dumpster, scratched with what must have been a nail or piece of metal, were words. Day 2847, still breathing, still hopping, VK. 2,847 days, nearly 8 years on the streets, counting, surviving. Marcus pulled out his phone and made 3 calls. First, to Dr. Sarah Chen, the best trauma physician in Chicago. Second, to his head of security, background check, full investigation, absolute discretion. Third, to Margit, the owner of Salon Marguerite, the most exclusive salon in the city. "Margit," Marcus said as the ambulance pulled away, "I need you to clear your schedule tomorrow. All day. I'm sending someone to you, and she needs the kind of transformation that most people think is impossible." "Marcus, darling, you know I don't do house calls or charity cases. I'll pay you $200,000. And Margit, she has 2 meters of matted hair and nails that have been growing for 7 years. This isn't charity, this is resurrection." Silence on the line. Then, send her at noon, and Marcus, you're going to tell me why you're doing this. "Maybe," Marcus said, "if I figure it out myself." He stood in the alley for a long time after the ambulance disappeared, staring at the scratched words on the dumpster. Still breathing, still hopping. For the first time in 15 years, Marcus Blackwell felt something other than the weight of his empire. He felt purpose. Salon Marguerite occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse in River North, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling mirrors, the kind of place where Chicago's elite paid $500 for a haircut and signed NDAs before entering. Margit Rousseau had built her reputation on discretion, artistry, and the ability to transform anyone into their most powerful self. But nothing had prepared her for Victoria Kane. Marcus arrived at 11:30 with a woman so bundled in his oversized coat that only her eyes were visible. The hair, God, the hair, trailed behind her in a rolling cart they'd fashioned from medical equipment, like a bride's train made of nightmares. "Sweet Jesus," Margit breathed, her French accent thickening with shock. "This is Victoria," Marcus said quietly. "Victoria, this is Margit. She's going to help you today. I'll be in the waiting area." "No." Victoria's voice was stronger than yesterday, strengthened by a night in a warm bed, medical care, and the first real food she'd eaten in years. "Please stay. I don't want to be alone." Something shifted in Marcus's expression. "Of course, whatever you need." The transformation began with assessment. Margit and her team of 4 specialists approached Victoria's hair like archaeologists approaching a dig site, carefully, methodically, documenting everything. They worked in sections, starting at the ends, using special solutions to soften the matted tangles. "Talk to me," Margit said gently as she worked. "Tell me about this hair. When did you last cut it?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, watching herself in the mirror, or rather, watching the stranger she'd become. 8 years ago, February 14th, 2018, Valentine's Day. Marcus, sitting in the corner with his laptop, went very still. I was married then, Victoria continued, her voice distant. To Cameron Kane. Maybe you've heard of him, tech entrepreneur, Kane Tech Solutions. They did corporate espionage prevention systems. Margaret glanced at Marcus, whose face had gone carefully blank. I know the name, Margaret said carefully. Cameron didn't like me to change anything about myself without his permission, Victoria said. My hair, my clothes, my schedule. He said it was about maintaining image. We were a power couple, you see. I was an architect, award-winning. I designed 3 buildings that made Architectural Digest. I had a career, a life. Her hands, now bandaged from where Dr. Chen had carefully trimmed and treated her nails, clenched in her lap. The hair started as his preference. He liked it long, so I grew it long, then longer. By our 5th anniversary it was to my waist and he said cutting it would be disrespectful. By our 7th it was to my knees and I wasn't allowed scissors in the house. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Isn't that insane? No scissors, because I might damage his investment. Margaret's hand stilled in Victoria's hair. Marcus had closed his laptop entirely. When I finally tried to leave, when I told him I wanted a divorce, that I'd landed a position at a firm in New York, he destroyed me. Victoria's voice was steady now, factual, reciting history. He had connections everywhere, tech, finance, architecture. Within a week I was fired. My professional certifications were suspended pending ethics investigations that were completely fabricated. My bank accounts were frozen. He filed restraining orders against me, claiming I was unstable. The system believed him, Marcus said quietly. It wasn't a question. Every system believed him, Victoria confirmed. Police, courts, my own family. Cameron was charismatic, wealthy, connected. I was increasingly isolated, increasingly desperate. He'd taken my career, my reputation, my financial independence. But I still had my body, my mind, my ability to walk away. She gestured at her hair, now being carefully sectioned and treated. So I walked, or ran really. One night in 2018 I just left, took nothing, wore what I had on, disappeared into the city. And the hair, Margaret asked gently. I couldn't cut it, Victoria said. For the first year I told myself it was because I had no money, no tools, but that was a lie. There were free salons, shelters with resources. The truth is, the hair became my tent, my blanket, my hiding place. When you're invisible on the streets, you need armor, 2 meters of hair. People don't see a woman, they see a problem, they look away. It kept me safe, it kept me hidden. She met Marcus's eyes in the mirror. It kept me alive. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of scissors and falling hair. Margaret worked with tears streaming down her face, cutting away years of survival, revealing the woman beneath. Marcus stood and walked to Victoria's chair. Cameron Kane, he said quietly. Kane Tech Solutions. They approached Blackwell Industries 4 years ago for an acquisition. A merger, really. They wanted to combine his espionage prevention systems with our cloud security infrastructure. Victoria's eyes widened. Did you? I turned him down, Marcus said. Not because I knew about you. I didn't. You were already presumed dead by then. I turned him down because something about him felt wrong. The way he talked about control, about ownership, about making systems obedient. He paused. I built my empire on ruthless tactics, Victoria. I'm not a good man, but I know predators when I see them. Cameron Kane was a predator in a suit. He still is, Victoria whispered. Kane Tech is bigger now, more powerful, and I'm legally dead. He had me declared deceased in 2021, 7 years after I disappeared. It freed up his assets, let him remarry, gave him a tragic backstory for his public image. Marcus pulled out his phone, typed rapidly. Not for long. The transformation took 9 hours. Margaret and her team worked with the focus of surgeons, cutting away the weight Victoria had carried, treating her scalp, conditioning what remained. The fingernails had been Dr. Chen's domain, carefully trimmed, treated for infection, shaped back into something resembling normal. When Margaret finally turned Victoria's chair to face the mirror, the woman who looked back was a ghost made solid. She had a face again. Sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, those startling green eyes now visible without the curtain of matted hair. Her hair, cut to shoulder length and properly treated, shone dark auburn in the salon lights. Clean skin, shaped nails, the posture of someone who'd survived hell and come out breathing. "Oh my God," Victoria whispered, touching her reflection. "I forgot what I looked like." "You look like yourself," Margaret said firmly. "You look like a woman who refused to disappear." Marcus stood behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "You look like someone worth fighting for." That night in the penthouse suite Marcus had provided, Victoria stood at the window overlooking the same alley where they'd met. She wore borrowed clothes, designer pieces Jennifer had scrambled to acquire, and her hair was still damp from the third shower she'd taken, unable to believe she could be this clean. Marcus knocked softly before entering. "Dr. Chen says your physical health is surprisingly good, all things considered. Malnutrition, some vitamin deficiencies, but nothing that can't be managed. You're remarkably resilient." "I had to be," Victoria said. She turned from the window. "Marcus, why are you doing this? Really? You could have given me money, pointed me to resources, and walked away feeling philanthropic. Why this? Why all of this?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I had a sister," he said finally. "Sarah. She was brilliant, computer science prodigy, ethical hacker, the moral compass I never developed. 15 years ago she died in a car accident caused by a drunk driver who was the son of a senator. Money changed hands. Evidence disappeared. The driver got probation. Sarah got a grave." He sat down heavily in the chair by the window. "Before she died, I promised her I'd use my talents for good, that I'd build something that mattered beyond profit. And then she was gone and I was angry and I built an empire instead. I crushed competitors. I exploited loopholes. I became exactly the kind of man Sarah would have despised." "Until you saw me," Victoria said quietly. "Until I saw you," Marcus confirmed. "Counting days on a dumpster, still hopping, still fighting. You reminded me that survival is a form of resistance, that hope is a choice you make every single day. You reminded me of the promise I broke." Victoria crossed to him, knelt so they were eye level. "You can't save your sister by saving me." "I know," Marcus said, "but maybe I can honor her by helping someone who never stopped fighting, someone who deserves the choice to build whatever life she wants." "And what if what I want," Victoria said slowly, "is revenge?" Marcus met her eyes. "Then we'll make sure it's the kind of revenge that destroys him legally, publicly, and permanently. Cameron Kane took 8 years of your life. Let's make sure the whole world knows exactly what kind of monster he is." Victoria smiled, the first real smile in 2,847 days. "I think I'm going to like working with you, Mr. Blackwell." "Marcus," he corrected. "And Victoria, you're not working with me. You're working alongside me, partners, equals, because you're going to design the building that's going to bury him." "What building?" Marcus pulled out architectural renderings on his tablet. "The Victoria Kane Center for Domestic Violence Prevention and Survivor Support, 20 stories, River North, opening in 18 months, and its lead architect is going to be the woman Cameron Kane tried to erase from existence." Victoria's hand shook as she took the tablet. This is real." "Construction starts in 3 months," Marcus said. "I've already filed to have your death declaration overturned. My legal team is the best in the country. Your architecture license will be restored within weeks. And Cameron, he's going to watch you rise from the dead and reclaim everything he tried to steal. Every single thing." Victoria looked at the renderings, at the building that would bear her name, at the second chance being offered not as charity but as justice. "Day 2848, she whispered. "Still breathing, still hopping, still fighting." 3 months later, Victoria Kane stood in a conference room at Blackwell Industries, presenting architectural designs to a room full of investors, city officials, and journalists. She wore a tailored suit, her hair professionally styled, her nails painted a confident red. She looked like the architect she'd been 8 years ago, but stronger, forged by survival, sharpened by purpose. "The Victoria Kane Center will serve as both symbol and sanctuary," she explained, using a laser pointer to highlight features on the rendering. "Each floor represents a stage of recovery, immediate safety, medical care, legal advocacy, job training, permanent housing placement. The architecture itself tells a story of ascension, of moving from crisis to stability to thriving. The presentation was flawless. 3 major publications had already committed to cover stories. The Chicago Tribune had called it redemption architecture. The city council had fast-tracked permits. And most importantly, Cameron Kane had been suspiciously silent since Victoria's legal resurrection 3 weeks ago. Too silent. Marcus, watching from the back of the room, felt the familiar tension that had made him billions. The sense that something was wrong, that the other shoe was about to drop. It dropped during the Q&A session. "Ms. Kane," said a reporter from a tech publication Marcus didn't recognize, "how do you respond to allegations that your designs plagiarize work from your former firm, and that your dramatic resurrection is an elaborate fraud to gain sympathy and funding?" The room went silent, Victoria's face drained of color. "I'm sorry," she said carefully, "but I have no idea what you're talking about." The reporter held up a tablet. "Kane Tech Solutions issued a press release 20 minutes ago. They're claiming you stole proprietary designs before your disappearance, that you've been living under assumed names in Europe, and that this entire story is a fabrication designed to damage Cameron Kane's reputation and steal his architectural concepts." Marcus was moving before the reporter finished speaking. He reached Victoria's side as she swayed, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "This press conference is over," Marcus announced, his voice carrying the absolute authority that had built empires. "Any further questions can be directed to our legal team. Thank you." Security cleared the room efficiently, but the damage was done. Marcus could see it in Victoria's eyes, the familiar terror creeping back, the muscle memory of being gaslit, discredited, erased. "He's doing it again," Victoria whispered. "He's going to destroy me again." "No," Marcus said firmly, guiding her to a private office. "He's not, because this time you're not alone. This time you have resources. This time we fight back." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Richard, it's Marcus Blackwell. I need you to file a defamation suit against Kane Tech Solutions and Cameron Kane personally. Immediately. Also initiate a full forensic investigation into their business practices. I want every skeleton in that closet exposed. Yes, I'm aware of the cost. I don't care. Do it." Victoria sank into a chair. "You don't understand. Cameron doesn't fight fair. He'll fabricate evidence, buy witnesses, manipulate media. He's done it before. He's better at this than me," Marcus finished. "Victoria, I've destroyed competitors who thought they were untouchable. I've outmaneuvered hostile takeovers, broken monopolies, and rewritten market rules. The difference between Cameron and me is that I'm ruthless in business. Cameron is a sociopath in life, and sociopaths make mistakes when they're angry." "He's not angry," Victoria said. "He's never angry. He's calculated, cold." "He was calculated," Marcus corrected. "Until you came back from the dead. That wasn't in his plan, you surviving. That threatens his entire narrative. The tragic widower, the successful remarriage, the charitable foundation in your name, all of it depends on you staying buried. You being alive and thriving. That makes him look like either a monster or a fool." Marcus crouched in front of her chair. "He's going to make mistakes now because he's desperate, and we're going to use every single one against him." Over the next week, the battle escalated. Kane Tech released evidence, emails supposedly from Victoria, bank records showing payments to European accounts, testimonies from colleagues who'd spotted her abroad. The media frenzy was brutal. Half the outlets portrayed Victoria as a fraud. The other half questioned the convenient timing of Cameron's allegations. Marcus's team worked around the clock. Forensic analysis proved the emails were fabricated. The European bank accounts were traced to shell companies owned by Kane Tech subsidiaries. The witnesses were employees on Cameron's payroll. But Cameron's most devastating move came on a Wednesday afternoon. Victoria's phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Hello, Victoria." Cameron's voice was exactly as she remembered, smooth, controlled, with an undercurrent of absolute certainty. "You've been very busy." Victoria's hand shook. Marcus, working on his laptop nearby, looked up sharply. "I have nothing to say to you," Victoria managed. "But I have something to say to you," Cameron continued pleasantly. "This little performance you're putting on, it ends now. Drop the building project. Issue a public apology. Admit you fabricated this story, and I'll let you disappear again with enough money to live comfortably somewhere far from Chicago. And if I don't, then I release the photos." Victoria's blood turned to ice. "What photos?" "From your time on the streets. A private investigator has been documenting you for years. I always suspected you weren't really dead. There are hundreds of photos, Victoria, you at your absolute lowest, eating garbage, urinating in alleys, looking like an animal. Imagine those photos on every news site, every social media platform. Imagine the headlines. Fraud's homeless hoax. Billionaire's latest charity case exposed." Marcus had moved to Victoria's side, close enough to hear. "You have 48 hours, Cameron said. After that, I destroy you more thoroughly than you were destroyed before. This time, there won't be anything left to resurrect." The line went dead. Victoria looked at Marcus, tears streaming down her face. "He's going to do it. He's going to release those photos, and everyone will see me at my worst, and they'll think I'm a fraud, and the center will be canceled and—" "Stop," Marcus took her hands. "Victoria, listen to me. Those photos, they're not weapons, they're evidence. Evidence of what he did to you. Evidence that you survived impossible circumstances. Evidence of strength, not shame." "You don't understand what it's like to be seen that way," Victoria said. "To have your worst moments displayed for judgment." "You're right," Marcus said. "I don't, but I understand power, and I understand that Cameron is making the biggest mistake of his life." He pulled out his phone. "How would you feel about calling his bluff? About releasing those photos yourself, on your terms, with your narrative, before he can weaponize them?" Victoria stared at him. "That's insane." "That's jujitsu," Marcus corrected. "Use his attack against him. We release the photos alongside your story, the real story. Not as shameful secrets, but as testimony. We show the world exactly what survival looks like. What it costs. What it takes. We make you not a victim or a fraud, but the most credible witness against domestic abuse in the country." "He'll still spin it," Victoria said. "He'll say I staged it, that the photos are manipulated." "Let him try," Marcus said. "Because while he's defending against those accusations, my team is going to release everything we found on Kane Tech. The falsified evidence, the paid witnesses, the shell companies, the pattern of harassment that goes back years and includes 3 other women who have signed affidavits. We're going to bury him in so much truth he won't know which direction to defend." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "If we do this, if I expose myself like that, there's no going back. Everyone will know everything." "Yes," Marcus agreed. "Everyone will know you're a survivor. Everyone will know you spent 8 years on the streets and came out fighting. Everyone will know that Cameron Kane is a monster who tried to erase you and failed." He squeezed her hands. "But it's your choice, Victoria, always your choice. I'll support whatever you decide." Victoria stood, walked to the window overlooking Chicago. Below, the city sprawled in all directions, the same city where she'd hidden, survived, suffered, and now stood ready to fight. "Day 2939, she said quietly. "Still breathing, still hopping, still fighting." She turned to Marcus. "Let's destroy him." The press conference was scheduled for Friday at noon in the atrium of Blackwell Industries. Marcus had initially suggested somewhere neutral, but Victoria had been firm. "Let him see us on your territory. Let him know I'm not hiding anymore." By 11:45, the atrium was packed. Every major news outlet had sent crews. Social media was exploding with speculation. Cameron Kane had issued a statement promising devastating revelations at the same time. Victoria stood in Marcus's office looking at her reflection. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, minimal makeup. She looked strong, certain, terrified. "You don't have to do this," Marcus said for the 10th time. "Yes," Victoria said, "I do." At exactly noon, they walked into the atrium together. The crowd quieted instantly. Victoria approached the podium while Marcus stood slightly behind her, support, not control. "My name is Victoria Kane," she began, her voice steady. 8 years ago, I was declared legally dead. My husband, Cameron Kane, held a memorial service, established a charitable foundation in my name, and moved on with his life. But I wasn't dead. I was hiding, surviving, becoming invisible because the alternative was being erased. She nodded to Marcus, who pressed a button on his tablet. Behind her, a massive screen flickered to life, displaying the first photo. Victoria, recognizable only by her eyes, surrounded by 2 meters of matted hair, eating from a dumpster. The crowd gasped. "This is me," Victoria said calmly. "January 2026, 7 years homeless. This is what survival looks like when a powerful man decides to destroy you, when systems fail, when invisibility becomes armor." Another photo. Victoria sleeping in a doorway, her hair spread around her like a blanket. These photos were taken by a private investigator Cameron hired. He's held them for years. He called me 2 days ago and threatened to release them unless I disappeared again. Unless I admitted this entire story was a fraud and gave up the Victoria Kane Center. Another photo. Victoria at her absolute lowest, barely recognizable as human. I refused, so instead of letting him weaponize my survival, I'm sharing it myself. Not as shame, not as weakness, but as evidence. Evidence of what intimate partner abuse looks like. Evidence of how power imbalances destroy lives. Evidence that the system protects wealth over truth. The photos continued, a brutal, honest timeline of suffering and survival. But Victoria never looked away from the cameras. "Cameron Kane didn't just abuse me," Victoria continued. "He systematically dismantled my life, my career, my finances, my reputation. When I tried to leave, he used every resource available to make me unemployable, unfundable, and unbelievable. He succeeded so thoroughly that disappearing became the only option." She paused, letting that sink in. "But I didn't die, I survived. And 3 months ago I met someone who reminded me that survival isn't enough, that I deserved not just existence but life, choice, power over my own story." Victoria gestured to Marcus. "Marcus Blackwell gave me resources, yes, but more importantly he gave me agency, the choice to hide or fight, to rebuild or run, and I chose to fight." The screen changed, showing legal documents. "Over the past 3 months, our legal team has uncovered extensive evidence of Cameron's systematic abuse, not just of me, but of 3 other women who have come forward with similar stories. We've documented falsified evidence, paid witnesses, and shell companies designed to hide assets and manipulate narratives. All of this will be turned over to federal prosecutors today." Another change. Architectural renderings of the Victoria Kane Center. "The building that bears my name isn't just a shelter. It's a statement. That women who have been erased can rebuild. That survival can transform into advocacy. That the systems that failed us can be redesigned with us at the center." Victoria's voice strengthened. "Cameron Kane tried to make me disappear twice, first by abuse, then by threatening exposure, but I refused to be ashamed of surviving. I refused to be silenced by the threat of being seen at my lowest. I refused to give power to the man who spent years taking power from me." The final photo appeared. Victoria as she was now, strong and certain, standing in front of the construction site for her building. "This is also me, Victoria Kane, architect, survivor, advocate, woman who spent 2,939 days on the streets and refused to stop hopping. Woman who's building the first of many centers designed by survivors for survivors. Woman who's done hiding." She looked directly into the cameras. "To other survivors watching this, you are not alone. Your worst moments are not your identity. Your survival is not shameful, it's powerful. And there are people ready to stand with you when you're ready to fight." Victoria stepped back from the podium. "I'll take questions now." The chaos that erupted was immediate and overwhelming. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. But through it all, Victoria stood steady, answering with brutal honesty about homelessness, abuse, survival, and choice. 45 minutes into the Q&A, the atrium doors burst open. Cameron Kane entered flanked by lawyers, his face a mask of controlled fury. He was exactly as Victoria remembered, handsome, polished, exuding the kind of confidence that came from never being held accountable. "This is defamation," Cameron announced, his voice cutting through the noise. "Fabricated accusations from a disturbed woman who abandoned her responsibilities and is now engaging in an elaborate fraud." "Mr. Kane," Victoria interrupted, and her voice carried such authority that Cameron actually stopped speaking. "You're right that I abandoned my responsibilities. I abandoned the responsibility to protect your reputation, to minimize your abuse, to make myself smaller so you could feel larger." She stepped down from the podium, walking toward him. Every camera in the room followed her. "You wanted to expose me," Victoria said, "to show the world what I looked like at my lowest, to use my survival as a weapon, so I did it myself. I showed them everything, every degrading moment, every survival choice. Every day I counted and kept breathing despite you." She stopped directly in front of him. "And you know what they saw? Not a fraud, not a disturbed woman, but a survivor. Someone who refused to be erased. Someone who builds buildings now, who helps others, who transforms trauma into architecture." Cameron's composure cracked slightly. "You stole my designs." "I designed buildings before I met you," Victoria said coldly. "I was an award-winning architect while you were still building your father's company. Everything I created was mine. The only theft that happened was you stealing my life, my career, and 8 years I'll never get back." Marcus had moved closer along with security, ready for any escalation. But Victoria didn't need protection. She needed witnesses. "I have evidence," Cameron said, but his voice had lost certainty. "Emails, records." "Fabricated by your team," Victoria said. "Already proven fraudulent by forensic analysis. Every single piece of evidence traces back to Kane tech subsidiaries. You got sloppy, Cameron. Or maybe you always were, and I just wasn't in a position to fight back before." She glanced at the cameras, then back at Cameron. "But I'm in that position now. Federal prosecutors are reviewing evidence of your systematic harassment of multiple women. The SEC is investigating Kane tech shell companies. And the court of public opinion," she gestured at the live streaming cameras, "they just watched you burst into a press conference to intimidate a domestic abuse survivor. How do you think that's playing?" Cameron's face had gone white. "You can't, this isn't, I'll sue you for everything." "With what money?" Marcus interjected quietly, showing his phone screen. "Kane Tech stock has dropped 42% in the last hour. Your board is calling an emergency meeting. 3 major investors just pulled funding. And the footage of you threatening Victoria on Wednesday, the call you thought was private, we have it. It's with prosecutors now." Cameron looked between them, realizing perhaps for the first time that he'd lost. "You can't do this to me," he said, and the entitlement in his voice was breathtaking. "I'm Cameron Kane. I built an empire. I have connections, resources." "You had power," Victoria corrected. "Past tense, you used it to hurt women. To silence them, to make them invisible, but we're not invisible anymore. And your power, it's gone." She stepped back, creating distance. "I don't need revenge, Cameron. Watching you face consequences is enough. Watching you explain to prosecutors, shareholders, and the public why you systematically abused multiple women and falsified evidence to cover it up. That's justice." Cameron opened his mouth, closed it, looked at his lawyers. They were already backing away, distancing themselves. "Get out of my building," Marcus said quietly. "Security will escort you." As Cameron was led away, his exit captured by dozens of cameras, his empire crumbling in real time, Victoria turned back to the press. "That's what accountability looks like," she said simply. "Not perfect, not complete, but real, witnessed, public." She returned to the podium. "The Victoria Kane Center breaks ground next month. We're hearing, actively seeking survivors who want to contribute to the design, the programming, the future of survivor-centered support. If you need help, reach out. If you want to help, reach out. If you have a story like mine, know that it ends not with shame but with choice." 6 months later, Victoria stood on the rooftop of the partially constructed Victoria Kane Center, watching the Chicago sunset paint the skyline in golds and purples. 20 floors of steel and glass rose around her, each level a promise: safety, healing, choice, future. "Penny for your thoughts." Marcus climbed the temporary stairs to join her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Just thinking about how different this view is from the one in the alley," Victoria said, accepting the coffee. "Same city, different altitude." Marcus smiled. "The construction supervisor says we're ahead of schedule. The community center floors will be operational by fall, full building completion by next spring." "I still can't believe it's real sometimes," Victoria admitted. "That I get to build this, that I get to help others build their lives." "Believe it," Marcus said. You've already changed 300 lives through the program. The waiting list is over 1,000 people. You're creating a model that's being replicated in 4 other cities." Victoria looked at him, this man who'd stopped his car in an alley, who'd seen her at her absolute lowest and offered not pity but partnership. "We're creating it. This doesn't happen without you." "This was always yours," Marcus said. "I just provided resources. You provided the vision, the courage, the proof that resurrection is possible." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city wake into evening. Below, the streets where Victoria had once hidden were now paths to her building, her future, her choice. "Cameron's trial starts next month," Marcus said carefully. "Federal charges for wire fraud, evidence tampering, harassment. The DA says it's one of the strongest cases they've ever built." "I know," Victoria said. "I've been asked to testify. I'm going to." "Are you ready for that?" Victoria thought about the question, really thought about it. Ready. As if there was a finish line to healing, a point where the past stopped mattering. "I'm ready to tell the truth," she said finally. "Ready to stand in a courtroom and state facts. Ready to look at him without fear. I don't know if that's the same as ready, but it's enough." Marcus nodded. "For what it's worth, I'll be there, front row, every day." "That's worth everything," Victoria said quietly. Marcus set down his coffee, turned to face her fully. "Victoria, there's something I need to say. And I need you to know there's no pressure here, no obligation, no expectation. I'm saying this because it's true, not because I expect anything in return." Victoria's heart began to race. "Okay." "When I saw you in that alley, I thought I was saving you," Marcus said. "But you saved me. You reminded me what purpose feels like, what using power for something other than profit means, what it means to be accountable to something beyond the bottom line." He took her hands carefully. "I started this as penance, redemption for promises broken, but somewhere along the way it became more. You became more." "Marcus." "I'm in love with you," Marcus said simply. "Not the rescued version, not the grateful survivor. You, the architect who redesigned systems, the advocate who transforms pain into purpose, the woman who counted 2,939 days and never stopped hopping." He paused. "But I need you to know that this doesn't change our partnership. You don't owe me anything. Not gratitude, not affection, certainly not love. I just needed you to know how I feel." Victoria felt tears streaming down her face, but they were different from the tears she'd cried before. These were tears of choice, of feeling, of allowing herself to want something beyond survival. "I was so afraid to feel anything," she whispered. "For so long, numbness was survival. Wanting nothing meant he couldn't take anything. But you," she squeezed his hands. "You gave me back the ability to want, to choose, to feel safe enough to feel." "And what do you want?" Marcus asked quietly. Victoria looked at this man who'd offered her everything while demanding nothing, who'd stood beside her, not in front of her, who'd given her power and space and choice. "I want to build this building with you," she said. "I want to continue transforming how we support survivors. I want to testify at that trial and know you're there. And I want," she took a breath, "I want to see if what we've built together can become something more, if partnership can become love, if two people who were both running from their pasts can build a future together." Marcus smiled, a real smile, the kind that transformed his entire face. "Is that a yes?" "That's a choice," Victoria corrected. "My choice, to try, to hope, to love if we get there." She leaned forward, kissed him softly. "To count new days with you instead of counting survival days alone." "Day 2,939, Marcus murmured against her lips. "Still breathing." "Still hopping," Victoria added. "Still fighting," they finished together. Below them, Chicago hummed with life. Above them, stars began to appear. And between them, in that moment, was the rarest thing either had known. Peace. Epilogue 9 months later. The grand opening of the Victoria Kane Center drew thousands. Politicians, activists, survivors, journalists, and donors packed the plaza outside the 20-story building that had transformed Chicago's skyline and the national conversation about domestic violence support. Victoria stood at the podium wearing a tailored suit she designed herself. Successful architect reclaimed, powerful woman rebuilt, survivor thriving. Beside her stood Marcus, now chairman of the newly formed Blackwell Foundation for Survivor Advocacy. Behind them, the building rose like a promise made solid. 2 years ago, Victoria began, I was eating cold pasta from a dumpster in an alley, counting days, and wondering if survival was all I had left. Today, I stand in front of a building that proves survival is just the beginning. The crowd erupted in applause. This center represents more than shelter or services, Victoria continued. It represents a fundamental redesign of how we support people in crisis. Every floor was designed by survivors. Every program was built with survivor input. Every staff member understands that support without dignity is not support, it's just another form of control. She gestured to the building. Floors 1 through 5, immediate crisis intervention and safety. Floors 6 through 10, medical care, legal advocacy, and mental health support. Floors 11 through 15, job training, education, and financial independence programs. Floors 16 through 19, permanent supportive housing. And floor 20. Victoria smiled. Floor 20 is the Victoria Kane School of Survivor-Centered Architecture, where survivors learn to design buildings, systems, and futures, where trauma transforms into expertise, where the people who have lived through crisis become the people who solve it. More applause. Victoria waited for it to quiet. I want to thank everyone who made this possible, the construction crews who worked around the clock, the donors who believed in this vision, the survivors who shared their stories to shape our programs, the advocates who have been doing this work for decades and welcomed us into the movement. She looked at Marcus. And I want to thank Marcus Blackwell, who saw a woman at her lowest and offered not pity but partnership, not rescue but resources, not control but choice. Marcus stepped forward, taking the podium. 2 years ago, I made a decision in an alley that changed my life. I thought I was offering help, but Victoria taught me the difference between charity and justice, between saving someone and empowering them, between using resources for feel-good optics and using power for systemic change. He addressed the crowd directly. The Blackwell Foundation is committing $1 billion over the next decade to replicate this model nationwide. Because Victoria was right, we don't need more band-aids. We need redesign. We need survivor-centered solutions built by the people who understand crisis from the inside. The crowd roared approval. But more than funding, Marcus continued, we're committing to accountability, to listening to survivors, to stepping back when our ideas don't serve the people we're meant to support, to using power to amplify rather than overshadow. He looked at Victoria, to partnership instead of patronage. Victoria returned to the podium for the final announcement. As of today, the Victoria Kane Center is operational. We have immediate capacity for 100 people in crisis, with programs serving 500 more. Our waiting list is being processed, our staff is trained, and our doors are officially open. She paused, looking out at the crowd, at the survivors she recognized, the advocates she'd learned from, the journalists who told this story, the strangers whose lives might someday be touched by this work. To everyone watching this who's counting days like I once did, who's surviving but not yet thriving, know this: you are not alone. Your worst moments are not your definition. Your survival is powerful. And there are buildings rising across this country designed specifically for you, designed by people like you, designed to prove that resurrection is always possible. She raised her voice to carry across the plaza. Welcome to the Victoria Kane Center. Welcome to proof that hope is architectural, that healing has structure, that every person deserves the dignity of choice. The ribbon cutting was ceremonial, Victoria using scissors that Marcus had had custom made, engraved with her name and the date she'd left the alley. As the ribbon fell, the crowd surged forward, and the building opened its doors to its first residents. That evening, Victoria and Marcus stood once again on the rooftop, this time of the completed building. The skyline glittered around them, Chicago spread like a jewel box. I have something for you, Marcus said, pulling out a small box. Victoria's breath caught. Marcus. I know we said we'd take it slow, Marcus said, but I also know that I want to spend my life building things with you. Buildings, yes, but also systems, solutions, a future where power serves healing instead of hurting. He opened the box, revealing a ring, simple, elegant, with a small inscription visible on the band. Day 1. I'm not asking you to forget days 1 through 2939, Marcus said. I'm asking if you want to start counting differently. Day one of our life together. Day one of building something new. Day one of choosing each other every day as equals. Victoria looked at the ring, at this man, at the building they'd created together. She thought about the woman in the alley, about the promise she'd made to herself to keep breathing, keep hopping, keep fighting. She thought about how survival had transformed into something more, how choice had led to healing, how partnership had become love. Yes, she said, her voice steady and certain. Day one, let's start counting. Marcus slipped the ring on her finger, kissed her as the Chicago lights sparkled around them, as their building stood solid beneath them, as the future spread infinite and possible. Day one, he repeated, still breathing. Still hopping, Victoria added. Still building, they finished together. And 20 stories below, in rooms designed for safety and healing, 100 people began their own new counts. Day one of shelter. Day one of medical care. Day one of believing that survival could become something more. Day one of choosing to hope again. What would you have done if you saw Victoria in that alley? Would you have walked past, convinced yourself it wasn't your problem, told yourself someone else would help? Or would you have stopped, truly stopped, and offered not just a handout but a hand up? This story isn't just about one woman's journey from the streets to a 20-story center that bears her name. It's about every single person who's been made invisible by systems designed to protect the powerful. It's about the Victorias still out there right now, brilliant, capable, surviving, who deserve so much more than survival. And it's about the choice we all have to see or to look away. If Victoria's transformation made your heart race, if this story reminded you that justice isn't just possible but necessary, I need you to do something right now. Smash that like button if you believe survivors deserve dignity, not pity. If you believe wealth should serve healing instead of harm. If you believe one person with courage and one person with resources can literally rebuild lives. Commit to being someone who stops in the alley, who questions the narrative, who refuses to let powerful abusers win. Tell me, have you ever witnessed or experienced something like Victoria's story? What would you have done in her shoes? Share your truth because your voice matters in this conversation. Right now, someone in your network is surviving like Victoria survived. Someone needs to know there's a path from crisis to choice. Someone needs proof that coming forward, fighting back, and rebuilding is possible. Hit that share button. Send this to someone who needs hope. Post it on your timeline. Tag someone. The Victoria Kane Center is real, by the way. Versions of it are being built right now. And it started with one person refusing to walk past suffering. It continued with partnership instead of patronage. And it succeeded because people like you demanded better. So let me ask you again, what would you have done in that alley? Your answer starts with action. Like, comment, subscribe, share. Let's make sure the next Victoria doesn't wait 2,939 days for someone to stop. Let's be the someone who stops. Day one starts now. Let's go.